Before the Messiah was born, there was a time much like our own. God's people gathered, fasted, and raised their hands in prayer. But inside, the Israelites were trapped. Buried beneath the chains of slavery, Egypt ruled God's people for 400 years, and hope seemed buried beneath the wicked Pharaoh's throne. Slave masters forced brutal labor and starvation. Mothers were left in agony as Pharaoh slaughtered every newborn Hebrew son. Then, under the hand of Pharaoh's own daughter, God raised up the voice of a man who would change history. His name was Moses. Moses was not just a prophet. He saw the future. God revealed to him the fall of Egypt, the Hebrew promised land, and the coming of the Messiah. But Moses saw more than just prophecies. He had a relationship so deep with God that he glimpsed the afterglow of the Lord, allowing him against all odds to free the Israelites from slavery. A long time ago, God made a promise, a beautiful promise. "Your family will be as countless as the stars," he said to Abraham. Genesis 15:5. Abraham's son was Isaac, and Isaac's son was Jacob. Jacob, Abraham's grandson, carried forward that same promise. God renewed his covenant with Jacob and gave him a new name, Israel. Through Jacob, the promise began to take visible shape, because Jacob had 12 sons. These sons became the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so, Jacob, also called Israel, had 12 sons in which Joseph was included. Joseph ruled in Egypt. He was sold into slavery, but God lifted him high. He became ruler in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Because of Joseph, the whole nation survived famine. As a reward, his family moved to Egypt and settled there in peace. Years passed. Joseph and all of his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, didn't stop growing. Children were born. Grandchildren played in the dust. Those 70 souls in total entered Egypt with Jacob. In time, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. Then, a new king rose in Egypt, Pharaoh. Proud and powerful, people treated him like a god. His word was law, and no one dared to question him. Egypt was rich and strong, with mighty armies, tall temples, and endless fields of grain. But Pharaoh's heart was hard. He cared more about power than people. Pharaoh didn't know Joseph. He had no knowledge of all Joseph had done for Egypt. He looked at the Israelites and felt afraid. "Look at them," he said. "They are more numerous than us, and they are stronger than we are. If a war ever happens, they might join our enemies. Then they could leave the country, and we would be in trouble." Fear led to cruelty. Pharaoh came up with a plan. He made the Israelites slaves. He put cruel overseers over them, hoping to wear them out with hard work. The Israelites were forced to build the cities of Pithom and Ramesses as supply centers for the king under the burning sun. Hands cracked from bricks and mortar, back bent by heavy loads. Yet the more the Egyptians worked them hard, the more the Israelites grew. They multiplied, spread, and became even more stronger. God's blessing could not be chained. Seeing this, Pharaoh panicked, and the Egyptians became alarmed. They were ruthless in their demands. The Israelites had to mix mortar, make bricks, and work in the fields. Their lives were bitter and full of harsh labor. One day, Pharaoh gave a terrible order. He called 2 Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, to him. "When you help Hebrew women give birth," he said, "watch the babies carefully. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live." Silence fell between these 2 women, but they feared God more than Pharaoh. They refused to obey the king's cruel order. They ensured every baby boy lived. Pharaoh was angry and called the midwives to question them. "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" They replied quickly but wisely, The Hebrew women are strong. They have their babies so quickly, we cannot get there in time." And it worked. The king had no proof. 9. God saw their faithfulness and was pleased with the midwives. Because they feared him, he blessed them greatly and gave them families of their own. And the Israelites continued to grow stronger. Finally, Pharaoh gave an order more harsh to all his people: "Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River. But let the girls live." Murder began beneath moonlight. Cries hidden behind walls, mothers trembling with fear. And yet in that very moment, light slipped through the cracks. A tiny baby boy wrapped in cloth, placed gently among reeds, floating on quiet waters, watched from afar by his sister's eyes, drifting toward destiny. This child did not know it yet, but he would one day lead an entire nation out of slavery. He will lead a nation out of darkness into freedom. A man and a woman from the tribe of Levi were married, and not long after, the woman became pregnant. She gave birth to a son, and from the very start, she knew there was something extraordinary about him. Fearing for the safety of her child, she kept him hidden for 3 whole months. But as time went on, it became impossible to hide him any longer. The baby boy was growing and glowing in a world he shouldn't have even stepped into. She looked at Aaron, remembering how he had survived the days of the midwives' disobedience to Pharaoh. But now the decree was harsher, merciless, and she feared this child would not escape it. Amram, her husband, stood silently nearby. He had been the first to hold the boy after his birth, his rough hands trembling as though afraid their strength might harm him. He was father to them all: Miriam, Aaron, and now this fragile son. And though his voice was seldom raised, his very presence steadied the household. Her eyes fell on Miriam, her firstborn. So fortunate, she thought. Fortunately, she thought, for whether then or now, Miriam would live. But she knew she must protect them all. Miriam, Aaron, and this radiant child cradled against her heart. In a way only a prophetess could, Miriam had dreamed of her mother bearing a male child who would one day save the Israelites. And now, that child was here. That night, the house was wrapped in silence. She sat weaving reeds together, her fingers raw, her tears falling onto the work she could hardly bear to finish. The basket lay before her, fragile, uncertain, yet it was all she had left to give her son. Miriam hovered nearby, keeping watch over the baby as he slept. Aaron, too young to understand, rested beside her. Amram stood at the doorway, his face heavy with grief he would not voice. When Jochebed faltered, his hand covered hers. "He's not ours to keep, Jochebed," he whispered, his voice trembling. "But the God who gave him will guard him." Jochebed bowed her head, drawing strength from his faith. She bent over the basket, weaving into it not only reeds and pitch, but their hope, their sorrow, and their surrender. She carefully waterproofed the small basket with tar and pitch. Gently, she placed her baby inside and set the basket among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. From a short distance away, Miriam watched, keeping a close eye on what might happen to him. She was very young, yet wise enough to sense that her mother, Jochebed, loved this child more dearly than any other. Then, suddenly, like a jolt, she knew exactly where the basket was heading, and she ran towards the direction. Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe, accompanied by her maids strolling along the shore. As she looked around, her eyes fell upon a basket hidden in the reeds. Curious, she sent a maid to fetch it. When the princess opened the basket, she saw a tiny baby boy crying. Her heart was moved. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said softly. At that moment, Miriam stepped forward, still catching her breath. "Shall I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. The princess gasped, surprised to see a little Hebrew girl dash forward among her maids. The girl was tiny but brave. She wasn't afraid of the crowd of servants, and her eyes were fixed on the basket. "Yes, do," the princess replied. Quickly, Miriam ran back to inform her mother. She had been told to stay home and watch over Aaron, but she refused. Defiant and determined, Miriam returned with her mother, Jochebed, by her side. It was as if God mocked the gods of Egypt. The Nile, their sacred river, the very source of life. Yet it carried a Hebrew child into Pharaoh's own palace, right into the arms of his daughter, into the house of the man who had ordered every Hebrew boy drowned. And still, the gods of the Nile did nothing. No crocodile, none stopped the child. Pharaoh's decree had failed before his very eyes. "Take this baby and nurse him for me. I will pay you for your help," Pharaoh's daughter told her. Gratefully, the mother took her son into her arms, holding him close and whispering words of love. For her, it was a joyful reunion, a moment she had longed for. For the little sister, a heavy worry lifted from her heart, as if one of the shadows of sadness had finally vanished from her family. As the boy grew older, his mother returned him to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own child. She named him Moses, meaning, "I lifted him out of the water." Jochebed locked eyes with her daughter. The girl's courage was her father's gift, carried boldly within her. At that moment, Jochebed understood why Miriam had been her firstborn. One day, she would stand as a protector, not only to Moses, but to his brother as well. One day, while Miriam was tending the sheep, Aaron slipped away. He knew he wasn't supposed to, but he followed the Nile anyway. Then laughter, a woman's laughter. Aaron pushed through the tall stalks until he saw her, an Egyptian noblewoman sitting on a stone patio with a baby in her lap. She kissed him, held him up to the sun, and when the child cried, she called out for Jochebed. Aaron froze. From the shadows, his mother appeared, smiling. She took the baby, Moses, and nursed him like no one else in the world existed. Not even Aaron. Hidden in the reeds, Aaron's chest tightened. He wanted to call her, but no sound came out. She only had eyes for Moses. Then she turned, carried the baby inside the palace, and disappeared. Aaron sank into the mud. Mosquitoes bit, frogs croaked. Something larger stirred in the dark waters. But worse than the fear was the ache in his heart. He wished the basket had sunk. He wished the crocodiles had taken Moses like they had so many other baby boys. And in that moment, Aaron's loneliness hardened into hatred. His mother only spoke of Moses now. Moses, the deliverer, the chosen one. Aaron clenched his fists and burned inside. He hated his brother, the brother who had stolen his mother's love. Miriam always looked after her little brother Aaron. Even when their mother returned home, Miriam stayed close, guarding him like a lioness protects her cub. But no matter what amazing things were happening with Moses, Aaron's own life stayed the same. He learned how to care for sheep. He carried straw to the mud pits. By the time he was just 6 years old, he was already scooping heavy buckets of mud. Aaron lived the life of a slave. Moses, on the other hand, grew up in a palace. While Aaron's teachers were cruel taskmasters, Moses was taught how to read, write, and live like an Egyptian noble. Aaron wore rags. Moses wore fine clothes. Aaron ate simple bread. and whatever his family could grow in their dry little garden. Moses enjoyed rich food served to him by others. Aaron worked under the hot sun, his feet sunk deep in mud. Moses walked cool stone halls, treated as if he were a prince. Aaron's life was full of toil and hardship. Moses' life was full of comfort and freedom. Aaron was born a slave, and he believed he would die a slave, unless God stepped in to rescue his people. Aaron struggled with envy and resentment for most of his life. But was it really Moses' fault? After all, Moses had been taken from his family and raised by idol worshippers. Aaron didn't see his brother for many years, not until the day Moses appeared at the doorway of their house. Their mother cried out with joy and rushed to hug him, but Aaron didn't know what to feel. The brother standing before him looked like an Egyptian, spoke no Hebrew, and felt more like a stranger than family. Aaron struggled with mixed emotions. Why would Moses leave behind a life of comfort in Pharaoh's household to live among slaves in Goshen? He could have stayed in the palace, enjoying fine clothes, fast chariots, and royal privilege. What could possibly make him give all that up? Their mother insisted that Moses belonged with his people, but Aaron was unsure. Wouldn't Moses be more helpful speaking to Pharaoh on behalf of the Hebrews? A darker thought even crossed Aaron's mind. What if Moses had been sent as a spy? Trust was hard to give. Then one day, Moses' fiery spirit showed itself. Though raised as a prince, he carried the blood and temper of their forefathers. When he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, Moses could not hold back. He struck the Egyptian down, and together he and Aaron hid the body in the sand. It was then that Moses spoke words Aaron would always remember. "Someone has to defend you." Think of it, Aaron. Thousands of slaves rising against their masters. That is what the Egyptians fear. That is why they burden you with endless work. The next day, Moses went out again. This time, he saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He stepped in and said, "Why are you hurting your fellow Hebrew?" But the man replied, "Who made you our ruler and judge? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" Moses froze. Everyone knew. And when Pharaoh heard about it, he tried to kill Moses. So Moses fled. He ran away to the land of Midian. Weary from his journey, Moses sat down beside a well. Soon, 7 daughters of the priest of Midian came to draw water for their father's flocks. But rough shepherds rushed in and drove the girls away. Moses jumped up. He defended the girls. He even drew water himself and gave drinks to their flocks. When the daughters returned home, their father, Renewal, was surprised. "How are you back so soon?" he asked. "An Egyptian rescued us," they said. "He even watered our flocks," Renewal asked. "Where is he? Why did you leave him? Invite him to eat with us." So Moses came, and he stayed. In time, Renewal gave Moses his daughter, Zipporah, as his wife. Later, Zipporah gave birth to a son. Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have been a foreigner in a foreign land." Years passed. Pharaoh died. But the Israelites still groaned under the weight of slavery. They cried out for help. Their cries rose up to God. And God heard them. He remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He looked down upon his people, and God knew it was time to act. The rescue of God's people was about to begin. Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. One day, as he led the sheep deep into the wilderness, he came to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. Suddenly, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire within a bush. Moses stopped staring in awe. The bush was engulfed in flames, yet it was not consumed. "This is incredible," Moses whispered. "Why doesn't the bush burn up? I have to see this." As he drew closer, the Lord called out from the heart of the fire, "Moses! Moses!" "Here I am," Moses replied. "Do not come any closer," God warned. "Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this, Moses covered his face, afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries under the cruelty of their slave drivers. I know their pain, and I have come down to rescue them, to bring them out of Egypt and into a fertile and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt." But Moses hesitated. "Who am I to go before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the Israelites out of Egypt?" The Lord answered, "I will be with you. And here is your sign. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will worship me right here on this mountain." Still unsure, Moses asked, "If I go to the Israelites and tell them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me,' they will ask, 'What is his name?' What should I say?" God replied, "I am who I am. Tell them, 'I am has sent me to you.' Say to Israel, 'Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name for all generations." Then God continued, "The elders will believe you. Then you and they must go to the king of Egypt and say, 'The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Allow us to take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know the king will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will raise my hand and strike Egypt with miraculous signs. Then he will release you. And when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. I will cause the Egyptians to look favorably on you, and they will give you silver, gold, and fine clothing. Each Israelite woman will ask her Egyptian neighbors and their guests for these treasures, and you will dress your sons and daughters in them, stripping Egypt of its wealth." Moses feared the people would not believe him. He worried they would deny that God appeared to him. God showed him signs. The staff in his hand turned into a snake. When Moses caught it by the tail, it became a staff again. His hand became diseased when he placed it inside his cloak. When he placed it back, it was healed. God told him if the people still doubted, he should take water from the Nile. On the ground, it would turn into blood. Still, Moses felt weak. He said he was not good with words. His speech was slow. His tongue stumbled. God reminded him, "He is the maker of every mouth, every eye, every ear. He gives a speech. He gives sight. He gives hearing. He promised to be with Moses, to guide his words." Yet Moses begged again. He asked God to send someone else. God became angry, but merciful. He pointed Moses to Aaron, his brother. Aaron was on his way. Aaron spoke well. He would be Moses' voice. Moses would speak God's words to Aaron, and Aaron would speak to the people. God commanded Moses to take the staff. With it, he would perform signs that revealed the power of God. Moses returned to Jethro, his father-in-law. He asked to go back to his family in Egypt. Jethro gave him his blessing. "Go in peace." God spoke to Moses. Those who once sought his life were gone. The path back was clear. Moses gathered his family. He placed his wife and sons on a donkey. In his hand, he carried the staff of God. God gave him a charge. Before Pharaoh, he must perform the signs. Yet Pharaoh's heart would be hardened. He would not let the people go. But then, in the quiet of night, danger struck. The Lord confronted Moses. Death hovered over him. Moses had disobeyed the covenant God made with Abraham, a covenant promising descendants, land, and blessing. Circumcision was the sign. Moses had not circumcised one of his sons. Zipporah acted swiftly. She grabbed a sharp stone. She circumcised their son in the flickering firelight. She touched Moses' feet with the blood and declared, "You are a bridegroom of blood to me." Suddenly, the threat vanished. The Lord relented, and Moses was spared. The covenant was honored, and the journey to Egypt could continue. Aaron lifted another brick. Sweat dripped onto the clay. Every wall, every palace, every statue were built by Hebrew hands. Ramses named it all after himself. Pride ruled Egypt. The Hebrews suffered. The old Pharaoh tried to drown their children. Now Ramses forced them to work without rest. Aaron stacked the brick, heart heavy. "Lord, when will you free us? How long must we suffer? Joseph saved this land, and now we're treated like beasts." Then silence. The noise vanished, feet stomping, cries, the whip. A voice spoke, deep in his bones. "Go into the wilderness to meet Moses." The sounds returned. The whip cracked. Pain tore his back. But the voice stayed. Stronger than Pharaoh, stronger than any whip. Aaron gathered his 4 sons and his sister, Miriam. He told them that God had commanded him to go meet Moses in the wilderness. Questions rose all around Aaron. He was too old, the journey too far, the wilderness too dangerous. His children worried about food, about water, about finding Moses at all. But Aaron's heart was steady. God had spoken, and Aaron would obey. He remembered the prayers of many years. He remembered the promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If God had called him, then God would lead him. The doubts of others tugged at him, yet his trust was stronger. He could not wait, or fear would overtake him. So Aaron made his choice. He would go, alone, believing that God himself would provide the way. Aaron had been wandering the desert for days, alone under the scorching sun and freezing nights, surviving on tiny scraps of bread and the occasional drop of water. Every step tested his body and his faith. He questioned whether he had truly heard God's voice or simply imagined it, lost in thirst, hunger, and exhaustion. Yet the memory of that divine command, "Go out into the wilderness to meet Moses," pushed him forward. Each night he dreamt of his sons and the comfort of home, and each morning he rose, leaning heavily on his staff, sustained only by small oases and the hope of reaching his brother. Every step was uncertain, but turning back was no longer an option. Finally, after endless days of struggle, Aaron glimpsed a figure in the distance, a man by a small shelter moving toward him. His heart leapt. Could it be Moses? As the figure ran toward him, arms outstretched, joy and relief surged through Aaron. Strength renewed like an eagle, he raced down the rocks and embraced his brother, tears of laughter and gratitude streaming down both their faces. "God sent me to you," Aaron cried. And in that moment, in the quiet desert where hope had seemed lost, Moses held him tight, weeping, whispering, "God said you would come." Moses fled because he lacked boldness. He could not confront the Israelites with the truth he knew, so he ran. he was more aware of the pain they might inflict on him than of the courage it would take to stand before them. Yet the Lord brought him back. He could not remain hidden forever. To the very people he once ran from, he was sent again. This time to proclaim the word of the Lord with boldness. Moses shared every word the Lord had commanded him with Aaron, including the miraculous signs he was to perform. Together, they returned to Egypt. When Moses and his family reached Egypt, Aaron welcomed them into his home. Moses could hardly contain his emotions. Miriam ran to him, wrapping her arms around her brother, while Aaron's sons gathered close in joy. But Aaron noticed something. Hebrew words still did not come easily to Moses. With compassion, he spoke for him. God has chosen Moses to deliver his people from slavery. The Lord himself will perform wonders so mighty that Pharaoh will have no choice but to let us go. Miriam embraced Moses again. Her voice shook with memory. Our mother always believed you were the one. When Pharaoh's daughter saved you, she was certain God had set you apart for a great purpose. Aaron's sons carried the message through Goshen, the land of their ancestors, now a place of captivity. They called the elders of Israel to gather, for God had sent a deliverer, and his word must be heard. After they were gathered, Aaron spoke boldly, telling them everything the Lord had said through Moses. Meanwhile, Moses performed the miraculous signs right before their eyes. As the people watched, their hearts filled with awe and hope. They saw that the Lord had truly sent Moses and Aaron, and that he cared deeply about their suffering. Overcome with gratitude, the Israelites bowed down and worshipped. God had not forgotten them. He had come to deliver them from their misery. After presenting themselves to Israel's leaders, Moses and Aaron were ready to speak to Pharaoh. Aaron stepped into Thebes, Pharaoh's huge city, feeling small and nervous. The streets were full of people and busy markets, but all he could see were the giant statues and enormous stone buildings. He had always lived in Goshen, taking care of sheep, and never imagined he would meet Pharaoh. Every step felt harder than the last. Moses was nervous too, and Aaron whispered a little prayer for courage. The city felt so big and powerful, but he remembered God's miracles. The staff that became a snake, the sick people who got better, and the cries of their people asking for freedom. That thought made him feel braver. When they reached Pharaoh's palace, Aaron couldn't believe his eyes. Huge stone gates rose above him, carved with giant animals. Inside, tall columns and colorful walls glowed, and many people stared at them. Aaron held his staff tightly. It was time to speak to the king. Aaron and Moses walked closer to Pharaoh and froze at the sight before them. He sat on a golden throne with giant statues of Osiris and Isis standing tall on either side. Everything about Pharaoh, the crown, the robes, the staff, shined with power and wealth. Aaron felt small just looking at him. Pharaoh's eyes landed on the brothers, and he gave a sharp look. He signaled to his guard, who quickly stepped forward. "Why have you come before mighty Pharaoh?" the guard asked. Aaron gripped his staff tightly, his heart pounding. But he remembered God was with them. It was time to speak. Pharaoh laughed loudly. "Really? You expect me to listen?" His officials joined in, snickering at the two brothers standing before them. Pharaoh waved his hand as if they were nothing. "Who is this Lord of yours? Why should I let Israel go? They are my workers. I need them." He smiled coldly. "I don't know this God, and I won't let them leave." Aaron felt a surge of courage. "The God of the Hebrews has spoken to us," he said firmly. "Let us take a short journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to him. If we don't, we could die, Pharaoh shrugged. Why should I care if a few slaves die? There will be more. His counselors laughed, joining the mockery. Aaron's heart pounded as Pharaoh's eyes narrowed. I know you, Aaron and Moses, the king said quietly, his words full of threat. Then he shouted, Who do you think you are, stopping people from their work? Back to your labor. The guard stepped closer. Aaron gripped his staff tightly, ready to defend Moses if needed. Moses whispered, We must leave now. Aaron obeyed. Outside, the hot sun beat down. Aaron shook his head. I thought he would listen. Moses exhaled slowly. I told you he wouldn't. This is just the beginning of our troubles. That same day, Pharaoh sent orders to the Egyptian slave drivers and Israelite foremen. No more straw was to be provided for making bricks. The people had to gather it themselves, but the quota of bricks remained the same. Pharaoh accused them of laziness and demanded even more work to make them sweat. The Israelites searched the land for straw, while the slave drivers pressed them harder than ever. When the foremen failed to meet quotas, they were whipped. Desperate, they went to Pharaoh to plead for mercy, explaining it was not their fault. Pharaoh called them lazy and insisted the brick quotas remain unchanged. As the foremen left, they confronted Moses and Aaron, blaming them for the suffering. Moses returned to the Lord in distress, asking why this trouble had come upon his people and why nothing had been done to rescue them. When that day came, Pharaoh would have no choice but to release the Israelites, even drive them out of Egypt. God reminded Moses of his name, Yahweh, and of his everlasting covenant. Long ago, he had promised the land of Canaan to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Though the Israelites lived as strangers in a foreign land, God had heard their cries. He knew their suffering. With compassion and authority, God declared he would rescue his people. He would free them from oppression. He would redeem them with power and justice. They would belong to him, and they would know that he alone is Lord. The promised land would be theirs, a gift from God, fulfilling his covenant. When Moses told the people of Israel what the Lord had said, they refused to listen anymore. They had become too discouraged by the brutality of their slavery, too broken to listen. Their hearts were heavy with despair. Yet God's plan moved forward. He commanded Moses to return to Pharaoh and demand the release of his people. Moses hesitated. He doubted himself. He feared the people would not believe him and that Pharaoh would ignore him. But God reassured him. He gave instructions and appointed both Moses and Aaron to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. The mission was set, the promise was firm, and the God of their fathers would guide them every step of the way. The Lord spoke to Moses. He said, Listen carefully. I will make you look like God to Pharaoh. Your brother Aaron will speak for you. Moses was 80 years old. Aaron was 83. Moses must tell Aaron everything God commands, and Aaron will tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. But God warned, Pharaoh's heart will stay stubborn. This is so God can show many miracles in Egypt. Even then, Pharaoh will refuse to listen. God promised, I will strike Egypt. But I will rescue my people, the Israelites, with great power. The Egyptians will know I am the Lord. Aaron hunched low, covering his head, his staff across his knees. He would wait for his brother, no matter how long. Moses lifted his face to the sky. Aaron blinked against the twilight. He sat up, gripped his staff, and stood. The Lord has spoken to you. Moses faced him. We have to speak to Pharaoh again. They obeyed. They did exactly what the Lord commanded. God gave them instructions for Pharaoh's challenge. "Pharaoh will ask for a miracle," he said. "Tell Aaron to throw his staff down in front of Pharaoh. It will become a serpent." Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh again, declaring the word of the Lord. Pharaoh raised his hand, smirking as laughter echoed through the grand hall. The gold light of Ra spilled across his throne, catching the carved urious cobra at his brow. To Pharaoh's court, this serpent crown was not decoration, but protection. Wadjet, the fierce goddess of kingship, symbol of divine authority. For Hebrew slaves to invoke a serpent, here was an audacity almost unthinkable. Aaron felt the sound of laughter, but he didn't flinch. The ruler looked powerful, golden and proud, yet he could not see the God Aaron served. Aaron stepped forward, moving to stand beside Moses. He held his staff firmly, eyes steady. He would not shrink before Pharaoh. His father, Amram, had long awaited this day. When the staff touched the floor, it transformed. A beautiful cobra appeared, smooth and graceful, its hood spreading to reveal a mysterious mark. Gasps filled the room. The snake moved with an almost magical elegance, gliding across the stone floor. The Egyptians leaned forward in awe. Could this be an insult to Wadjet herself, or a rival god's messenger? Pharaoh's priests muttered beneath their breath, calling on their own deities for strength. They saw not just a serpent, but a foreign god pressing into Egypt's sacred space. Pharaoh's guard stepped forward cautiously. The magicians tried to match it, tossing their staffs, which also turned into snakes. To Pharaoh's court, this proved the balance of power. Egypt's gods hadn't been shamed. Yet the first serpent moved with a power no one could copy, gently overpowering the others. Silence fell over the hall. Everyone stared, wide-eyed, at the miracle before them. To the Hebrews, it was Yahweh's authority revealed. To the Egyptians, it was a dangerous omen. A foreign god encroaching upon Pharaoh's divine rule, swallowing Egypt's magic whole. Pharaoh's face showed astonishment, but also resolve. In his heart, he couldn't yield. To do so would mean shattering Mut, the sacred order Egypt's gods entrusted to him. The great serpent's unblinking eyes held the quiet authority of something far greater than any king. The room was filled with awe, a reminder that the God of Israel was mighty and wondrous. But just as the Lord had said, God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen. Outside the palace, the people of Egypt stirred. Rumors spread like wind through the markets. The Hebrews' God has challenged Pharaoh. Some laughed nervously, certain the magicians would prevail. Others whispered in fear, remembering the strange signs that already troubled the land. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Yet even as they spoke, unease gnawed at their hearts. For in the grand hall, a serpent had swallowed Egypt's serpents, and no one could explain how. The next morning, Moses and Aaron went to the Nile. They stood at the riverbank, staff in hand. God's command was clear. He would show Pharaoh that he alone was the true God. Aaron raised his staff, and Moses watched, heart steady but heavy. This river had once been a place of sorrow for the Hebrew people, where infants had been drowned. Now it would witness God's judgment. Aaron's grip tightened. He remembered their father's stories of the Nile's power, and now he felt both fear and awe that his own hands would bring God's sign upon it. Slowly the water began to change. Suddenly the river turned to blood. Fish floated lifeless on the surface. The water stank, and no one could drink from it. Blood covered the land. To Moses and Aaron, it was a terrifying and holy sign of God's power. They stood humbled, not as magicians, but as messengers, witnessing the Creator of the heavens and the earth bend Egypt's sacred river at their command. Aaron's breath caught, not in pride, but in trembling. For the Egyptians, it was sheer terror. The Nile was their lifeblood, the source of every harvest, every drink, every breath of the land. Now the river seemed cursed. Mothers cried as children choked on thirst. Fishermen wept over nets full of dead fish. Even the magicians could copy the miracle. But Pharaoh's heart remained hard. He refused to listen and returned to his palace, ignoring the devastation. Moses' chest tightened. He had expected resistance, but still he had hoped the sign would break Pharaoh's pride. Aaron's eyes lowered, torn between obedience to God and pity for the suffering people. Yet both knew that God's word would stand. The Egyptians could not ignore the river's blood. They dug along its banks, desperate to find drinkable water. Their hands bled as they clawed at the soil, hoping the ground itself might provide relief. Pharaoh's priests prayed to Hapi and Khnum, the gods of the Nile, and to Sothis, guardian of the floodwaters. They performed offerings and rituals, but the river remained red, and the stench of dead fish filled the land. Whispers spread. Some feared Pharaoh had lost the favor of the gods. Others thought it a foreign curse, a trick by slaves daring to rise against Egypt's divine order. Many wondered, if the Nile itself could bleed, what god could stand against this power? Even the Israelites felt the weight of it. They came with jars and skins to gather water, only to find blood seeping through their wells. Faith mixed with doubt as thirst burned their throats. Perhaps God wanted his people to see his power, to understand that no water, no life, no future could be found apart from him. The Lord had begun to show his strength, and the battle between Pharaoh and God had only just begun. Moses wondered silently if his people would have to endure the same suffering as the Egyptians. The Lord commanded Moses to return to Pharaoh. He warned that if Pharaoh refused to let the people go, a plague of frogs would cover the land. The Nile swarmed with frogs. They climbed out of the river, filling the palace, the bedrooms, and even the beds. They hopped into ovens, kneading bowls and every house. Frogs covered the people and the officials, leaping everywhere. Aaron raised his staff over the waters of Egypt. Frogs poured out, covering the land from rivers to canals to ponds. Even the magicians tried to copy it, and their magic brought more frogs. For the Egyptians, it was both strange and frightening. Frogs were usually a sign of life and blessing, but now they have become a curse. Women cried as they tried to bake bread, but found frogs in their bowls. Families shook out their beds only to have more frogs leap onto them. Priests tried prayers and rituals, hoping their gods would stop the invasion, but nothing changed. Some Egyptians whispered, "Have our gods turned against us?" Pharaoh saw the chaos and called for Moses and Aaron. Aaron and Moses were escorted respectfully to the palace this time. He begged for relief. Moses prayed to the Lord, and the frogs died. They were piled into huge heaps, and the stench filled the land. But when Pharaoh saw the frogs gone, the Lord hardened his heart, and he refused to listen, just as the Lord had said. The Israelites suffered too. Their small homes in Goshen were also filled with frogs. Children screamed in the night as frogs hopped across their sleeping mats. Mothers groaned when frogs ruined the flour they had saved for bread. Some Israelites complained, "If the Lord is with us, why does he bring frogs upon us too?" Yet others remembered the promise given to Moses. Even while pushing away the frogs, some hearts held tightly to that hope. Among them was Miriam. She hushed frightened children when the frogs leapt across the floor. She gathered the women together, reminding them, "The Lord has spoken through my brother. These things show his hand." do not fear." Still, as she lay awake that night, Miriam felt the weight of doubt pressing on her heart. She whispered into the darkness, "Lord, we believe. Help us to keep believing." Yet deep inside, she held a quiet certainty. Pharaoh's pride could not stand forever. One day, the ruler would bow, and the Lord would lead his people out with a mighty hand. Miriam's faith stretched beyond the plagues, beyond the stench and fear, to the promise of freedom she knew would come. The Lord spoke to Moses and gave a new command. Aaron was to raise his staff and strike the ground. When he did, the dust of Egypt transformed. Swarms of gnats filled the land. They covered the people and the animals. Every bit of dust became gnats. Pharaoh's magicians tried to copy it with their secret arts, but this time they could not. The gnats covered everyone, leaving no one untouched. Even the magicians recognized it. They told Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh would not listen. The Lord hardened his heart, and he refused to obey. The people groaned. They had no relief, no power, and no leader who cared for their safety. For Pharaoh did nothing to protect them. He ignored their cries, proving that his stubbornness was worth more to him than their well-being. The Egyptians scratched their skin, dusting themselves with oil and ash, but nothing stopped the biting. Farmers wailed as their animals stampeded and rolled in the dirt to escape the swarm. Priests tried to wash and offer sacrifices, but they could not even stand clean before their gods. The gnats covered their robes and their altars alike. Fear spread. If this is the finger of a god, who can stand against his whole hand? This was when the Egyptians started to fear the God of the Israelites. In Goshen, the Israelites suffered too. Gnats filled their homes, stung their children, and spoiled their food. Miriam gathered the women, fanning the children through the long, restless nights. "The Lord is near," she said, though her own body ached with bites. She whispered to the women, "Since the dust obeys him, he will surely bring us out." Aaron swiped at the gnats, but they clung to his skin and tangled in his beard. His body burned from the stings, yet it was not the pain that brought tears to his eyes. It was the weight of it all, the cries of Egypt and the groans of their own people. He looked at Moses and his chest ached. "How much longer, Lord?" he whispered. His tears fell, not from weakness, but from love for his brother, for his people, for the God who had sent them. But Aaron's heart burned with faith. The Lord will not fail them. He will show Egypt and Israel that he alone is God. Moses stood before Pharaoh, unafraid. Pharaoh tried to bargain, saying the Israelites could worship in Egypt, but Moses knew that was not possible. Their sacrifices would anger the Egyptians. The people had to go into the wilderness, just as the Lord had commanded. Pharaoh's face grew dark. He did not want to give in, but the flies swarmed around him and his palace. At last he agreed. He told them they could go, but not too far, and demanded that Moses pray for him. At his signal, guards stepped forward. Their hands gripped their spears, eyes fixed on Moses and Aaron. Aaron's heart pounded. He knew Pharaoh was ready. If Moses prayed then and there, their lives would be taken the moment he bowed his head. Death hovered in the hall like a shadow. But Moses did not lower his head. He lifted his voice instead, declaring that he would pray once he had left the palace. Tomorrow the flies will be gone. Pharaoh could not touch him, and the Lord's plan moved forward. When the palace doors closed behind them, Aaron's shoulders sagged. His chest shook as he whispered, "Thank you, Lord. You saved us." He turned to Moses, tears in his eyes. Pharaoh's heart was still hard, but hope began to stir in him. Freedom was no longer just a promise whispered in the dark. It was a light breaking through Egypt's shadows. The sun had just begun to rise over the fields when panic swept through the villages of Egypt. Farmers and herders ran to their barns and pastures, only to find their livestock lying lifeless in the mud. Oxen, sheep, goats, everything that had once sustained them, were gone. Families cried out in shock, unable to grasp the scale of the disaster. An official rode quickly from farm to farm, taking note of the devastation. Everywhere he looked, the same scene repeated itself. But then he noticed something strange. The herds belonging to the Israelites in nearby settlements were untouched, grazing peacefully. He shook his head in disbelief. "How can this be?" he muttered. "Not a single one of theirs is harmed, yet all of ours are dead." Whispers spread through the towns. Some feared a curse, while others whispered that a powerful God had taken notice of the Israelites. Mothers clutched their children tightly. Men stared at empty barns and silent pastures, knowing that without their animals, hunger and hardship would follow. Officials hurried to Pharaoh, reporting the devastation in every corner of the land. But even faced with undeniable proof of a power beyond their understanding, Pharaoh's heart remained hard. He refused to release the Israelites, leaving his people to bear the full weight of the disaster. Everywhere sorrow mingled with fear. Streets were quiet with grief, fields lay empty and abandoned, and the air itself felt heavy with tension. For the Egyptians, this plague was more than the loss of livestock. It was a stark reminder of a God whose power they could neither explain nor resist. The day had begun like any other, but a strange unease hung in the air. Smoke curled lazily from the kilns, but it was not the familiar scent of baking bricks that worried the villagers. It was the black soot that seemed almost unnatural in its heaviness. Rumors spread. Moses and Aaron were approaching Pharaoh again, carrying some new sign from their God. People lined the streets to watch. Some were curious, others fearful. And then it happened. Moses lifted his hand and tossed handfuls of soot into the air. The black dust swirled, settling on skin, hair, and clothing. At first, the Egyptians squinted, waving the ash away. But soon, an unbearable itch erupted across arms, faces, and bodies. Painful, angry boils began to blister, and cries of agony filled the air. Horses and cattle, goats and sheep, shook and whimpered in distress. Even the proud magicians, once thought invincible in their craft, stood helpless, their hands and faces covered in the same burning sores, unable to compete with the power displayed before them. In the homes and marketplaces, the people screamed and tried to find relief. Workers dropped their tools. Every corner of Egypt seemed to groan under the weight of this punishment. Fear gnawed at hearts, yet Pharaoh's stubbornness loomed over them all, refusing to release the Israelites. The Lord's hand had struck them, but their ruler would not relent. Everywhere, the Egyptians learned in the most painful way that this was not an ordinary affliction. It was a warning, a force beyond their understanding, and they were powerless to stop it. Pharaoh walked into the room, dressed in his fine royal clothes, but he had to be helped by 2 servants. Only a few of his advisors and magicians were there, all looking pale and tired from the painful boils. When Pharaoh tried to sit down, he groaned and muttered in frustration. The 2 servants quickly placed cushions for him. Holding onto the arms of his chair, he slowly lowered himself into the seat. "What do you want now, Moses?" he asked, his voice sharp but weak. God's message was clear. His people needed to be set free so they could worship him. Pharaoh's refusal had serious consequences. If he didn't listen, God would send another powerful plague. This time, it would show everyone that there was no one like the Lord in all the world. God could have wiped out Pharaoh and his people instantly, but he held back, showing mercy to reveal his power and make his name known everywhere. The next day, a terrible hailstorm came. It was unlike anything Egypt had ever seen. God warned that everyone and every animal in the fields needed shelter. Those who listened quickly brought their servants and animals inside, but some ignored the warning and left everything out in the open. At God's command, Moses lifted his staff to the sky. Thunder rolled, lightning flashed, and hail began to fall. The storm was fierce. People and animals in the fields were struck. Crops were destroyed, and even the trees were broken. The destruction was total. But the Israelites in Goshen were safe. Not a single hailstone fell there. The storm was so devastating that Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron. For a moment, he admitted his mistake. After seeing the destruction, God made Pharaoh's heart remain stubborn, and he refused to let the Israelites go. The Egyptians saw their fields destroyed and their lives collapsing while Pharaoh clung to his pride. He never protected them. He only pleaded when his own comfort was struck. More than before, they began to realize that Pharaoh's stubborn heart was their greatest danger. The land of Egypt had been punished. The Israelites were protected. And Pharaoh, just as God had said, still would not free God's people. God had told Moses to go back to Pharaoh. Pharaoh and his officials were stubborn so that God's miracles could be shown. These miracles showed God's power and would be remembered for generations. By now, Egypt was already suffering from the earlier plagues. The Nile had turned to blood, fish had died, frogs had covered the land, gnats and flies swarmed the people, livestock had died, and a hailstorm had destroyed the crops and trees. The fields were ruined, and food was becoming scarce. The land was in a terrible state. Moses went to Pharaoh again, but Pharaoh refused, and God warned that a new plague was coming, a swarm of locusts. The locusts came and covered the land so thickly that nothing could be seen. They ate everything left in the fields after the hailstorm and stripped all the trees bare. They even went into the palaces and homes of Pharaoh's officials. Egypt had never seen anything like this. Pharaoh's officials were frightened. They urged him to let the Israelites go, reminding him that the land was ruined. Pharaoh's face grew dark with anger. He pointed at Moses. "Listen carefully, Moses," he said. "If you think you can take your children with you, you are mistaken. I know what you are really planning. No, only the men will go to serve the Lord, just as you asked." He waved to his guards. "Take them out of my palace!" The servants rushed forward, pushing and shoving Moses and Aaron, shouting curses from their false gods. Aaron tried to lift his staff, but Moses grabbed his arm to stop him. The two of them were thrown out into the dust outside. God told Moses to stretch out his staff over the land. An east wind blew all day and night, and by morning the locusts had arrived. They covered the whole land and ate every plant and fruit that had survived the hailstorm. Nothing green was left. All through the day and night, a strong wind blew, and by morning it carried locusts across the land. By the time Pharaoh's soldiers sent for Moses and Aaron, it was too late. Every crop and food source outside Goshen had been destroyed. Pharaoh quickly called Moses and Aaron. Shaken and desperate, Pharaoh faced them. "I admit my sin against the Lord your God and against you," he said. "Forgive me this time, and pray to your God to remove this terrible plague." Moses lifted his prayers to God, and the wind changed. blowing westward. The locusts were carried into the Red Sea, leaving the land quiet and still. Egyptians stayed inside their homes, fearful of what might come next if Pharaoh refused to free the Israelites. Meanwhile, gifts began appearing at the Hebrew homes. "Pray for us in our time of need. Intercede with your God," they pleaded. "They still don't understand," Moses muttered, clutching his head beneath his prayer shawl. "They bow to us, Aaron, but it is God who has the true power." Even Miriam's frustration burned. Why doesn't God just destroy Pharaoh and be done with it? He could strike Ramses right in his palace. Moses lifted his head. The Lord wants the whole world to know that He alone is God. All the gods of Egypt are powerless. They cannot stand against Him. When Moses raised his hand again, darkness fell over all of Egypt. The sun disappeared, replaced by a heavy, inky gloom, darker than night. Outside Pharaoh's palace, Aaron wrapped his robe around himself, while Moses stood silently beside him. From the palace, the priests could be heard crying out to Ra, the sun god, begging him to bring light back to the sky. Aaron let out a quiet laugh, knowing that their false god had no power. The sun would return only when God willed it. Moses moved quickly, and together he and Aaron went to Goshen to gather the elders. Aaron sent out messengers, and the elders arrived, curious and complaining. Moses explained God's instructions clearly. They must prepare to leave Egypt, and everyone was to ask their neighbors for silver and gold. The Egyptians would give it freely, for God had granted favor to His people. He also told them that God had declared this month to be the first month of the year. On the 10th day, each family was to choose a lamb or young goat to care for until the 14th day, when it would be sacrificed. Moses warned them and gave instructions. The elders left in silence, filled with awe and fear of the Lord. For 3 days the people could not see one another. No one could move freely. But in the land where the Israelites lived, there was still light, and they were safe from the darkness. Aaron and Moses waited near the palace, quietly watching and listening. Finally, they heard Pharaoh shouting in fear and anger. Moses put his hand on Aaron, and they walked forward together into the dark palace. Aaron could see clearly, as if God had given him special eyes. He noticed Moses' calm and kind face, while Pharaoh looked around, confused and worried. Moses shouted back, his voice loud and strong, "I will never come to you again. This is what the Lord says. At midnight, He will pass through Egypt. Every firstborn son will die, from Pharaoh's oldest son on the throne to the youngest child of his servants. Even the firstborn animals will die." Aaron shivered, and sweat ran down his face. Pharaoh spread his arms, trying to find his way in the dark, and shouted angrily. He trusted the gods to protect his son. But Moses kept speaking. "There will be a terrible cry across all of Egypt, louder than anything anyone has ever heard. But in Israelite homes, everything will be calm. Then everyone will see that the Lord is powerful and can tell His people apart from the Egyptians. All the officials will run to me, begging, 'Please leave quickly and take your people with you.' Only then will I go." Moses turned and walked out of the hall, his face burning with anger. Aaron followed, amazed. He knew that God had spoken through Moses. The voice in the hall was God's. The lamb struggled for a moment, then went still. Blood poured into the bowl, the sharp metallic smell rising. Aaron's stomach turned, but the lamb was perfect, only a year old. He skinned it carefully, preparing its head, legs, and innards for roasting. Nadab took the carcass without hesitation. Aaron dipped sprigs of hyssop into the blood and smeared them across the doorframe. Red streaks ran across the lintel and posts. All across Goshen, Hebrew families did the same. Egyptian neighbors watched, puzzled and disgusted. Whispers spread. They threw out the yeast yesterday, and now this. Some Egyptians came close, desperate to join the Hebrews. They were told to circumcise every male in their household. Only a few followed through, moving in with the Hebrews and listening carefully to Aaron and Moses. Aaron's thoughts drifted. At first, he had wanted revenge. Now, he felt pity for those still worshipping lifeless idols. He longed to leave Egypt. Inside his home, silver and gold collected from the Egyptians piled high. But no treasure could save lives tonight. God's mercy was not for sale. It could only be earned through faith. Tonight, Pharaoh's pride would bring death. The angel of the Lord was coming. Every house marked with lamb's blood would be spared. Every firstborn in Egypt would fall. Faith alone would save the Israelites. Inside the house, the family prepared. The lamb roasted over hot coals, unleavened bread baked, bitter herbs laid out. The night grew heavier. Sandals on, cloaks tucked, the family gathered. This meal was the Lord's Passover. Screams tore through the night. Aaron closed his eyes, knowing the idols of Egypt held no power. Salvation came from God alone. More screams, closer this time, then wailing in the distance. Aaron felt relief swelling in his chest. God had passed over his people. Soldiers arrived. Pharaoh's son was dead. Pharaoh relented. The Israelites were free. Aaron hardly believed it. They had barely crossed the threshold when Aaron heard Pharaoh's anguished cry. "Leave us! Go away, all of you!" He hunched on his throne. "Go and serve the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds and be gone. Go, but give me a blessing as you leave." Aaron stood in the flickering torchlight, hardly able to believe he had heard Pharaoh relent. Was it over? Was it really over? Or would they get no farther than the streets of Thebes and find out Pharaoh had changed his mind again? Moses turned away without a word. "Go," one of the guards urged Aaron. "Go quickly, or we will all die." As they hurried through the streets, Aaron shouted, "Israel! Israel! Your day of deliverance is at hand." The Egyptians ran through the streets. They helped the Hebrews gather their belongings. They offered donkeys, food, and whatever they could spare. Everyone urged the Hebrews to hurry before another disaster struck. At the front of the crowd, Aaron moved with a heart full of joy and relief. His sons hurried to keep up, following closely behind Moses. Every time, Aaron exchanged a glance with Moses, a silent understanding of gratitude and awe passing between them. Moses walked steadily with his staff in hand. He watched over the people, his eyes scanning the crowd, checking on families, and offering quiet encouragement. Inside, he felt relief and the weight of responsibility all at once. He paused briefly to nod to the elders who were guiding the slower and weaker ones. He helped a trembling mother and steadied a heavy basket. Miriam moved among the women and children, her tambourine ringing softly. She sang at first quietly, then louder, and the women joined in, clapping and praising God. Her voice carried over the crowd, lifting their spirits. But alongside the excitement, there was still fear. Memories of the plagues weighed on their minds. The crowd was enormous and noisy. Voices called out to God in thanks. Sheep and goats bleated. Cattle followed behind, keeping the dust from choking the marchers. Children clung to their mothers, some crying, some laughing nervously at the strange bustle. Tools, baskets, and cooking pots were left behind, clattering on the ground as the people moved. Women carried bowls on their shoulders while cradling children, calling out to keep the little ones close. There was no time to prepare food. The journey had to begin. By sunrise, 600,000 men, along with their wives and children, were on the road to Succoth. Dust rose from the moving throng as more people joined along the way. Every tribe marched together, each following their standard. Even some Egyptians left their homes and followed the Israelites. They sought the protection of the God of Israel. Moses led the half-tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. They carried the bones of Joseph, their ancestor who had once saved Egypt from famine. The land stretched before them. As the sun climbed higher, a pillar of cloud appeared above the people. It shaded them from the heat and guided them safely along the road. Many looked up in awe, whispering prayers of thanks. Miriam's songs rang out across the crowd. The elders guided the people carefully, and Aaron's family stayed close together. The promised land awaited ahead, a land of milk and honey. It was a place where they could finally rest, stretch their legs, and live free. God told Moses to set apart every firstborn, both people and animals, for him. Then Moses turned to the people. It was the day unlike any other. It was the day the Lord brought them out of Egypt with a mighty hand. They were to remember it forever. Each year in the month of Abib, they would celebrate with a feast of bread made without yeast. 7 days of remembrance for freedom. And when their children asked, "Why?" the answer would be simple: because the Lord rescued us from Egypt. God also gave them a command. Every firstborn belonged to him. Sons would be redeemed, animals would be sacrificed. It was a sign for generations to come. God's power had set them free. When Pharaoh finally let them go, God didn't lead them through the shortest way to the promised land. God knew that if his people faced war so soon, their hearts might fail, and they would turn back to Egypt. The people marched out of Egypt like an army, carrying with them the bones of Joseph, just as he had asked long ago. He guided them through the wilderness toward the Red Sea, and the Lord himself went before them. A pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night, never leaving their side, always leading the way. So he led them on a longer path through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. The Israelites marched out boldly, like an army ready for battle. Moses carried with him the bones of Joseph, because Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear an oath. "One day God will come to your aid, and when he does, take my bones with you." From Succoth they set out and camped at Etham, on the edge of the wilderness, and the Lord himself went before them by day, a pillar of cloud to guide their steps. By night, a pillar of fire to give them light. So whether by day or by night, they could keep moving forward. And the Lord never removed his presence from before his people. The Lord directed Moses to lead the Israelites to camp near Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, across from Baal-zephon. Their position by the shore would make it appear as though they were trapped in the wilderness. God hardened Pharaoh's heart once again, and he prepared to pursue them. This moment was set to reveal the Lord's glory through Pharaoh and his entire army. So the Israelites camped beside the sea, just as the Lord instructed. The Egyptians pursued Israel. When news reached Pharaoh that the Israelites had truly fled, regret filled the palace. The king and his officials wondered what they had done, letting their slaves escape. Pharaoh prepared his chariot and summoned his army. 600 of Egypt's finest chariots, along with every other chariot and commander, rolled out for pursuit. The Lord had hardened Pharaoh's heart, and with fury he chased after the Israelites, who had left boldly with fists raised. The Egyptians came in full force, horses, chariots, and soldiers thundering across the land. They soon caught up with the Israelites, who were camped beside the sea near Pihahiroth. Escape through the Red Sea. A huge crowd of men, women, and children walked slowly into the desert, moving like waves of the sea. Dust rose under their feet and from the hooves of animals. Above them, a cloud covered the sun so they would not burn. This was exactly what Pharaoh had been afraid of these great people. They could have been a mighty army, but instead of fighting, they had cried out to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God had set them free. Some Egyptians also came with them, and Aaron wondered if they truly wanted to follow God, or if they were only escaping their ruined land. The people were full of joy. They waved when they saw Moses and Aaron. "Moses! Aaron!" they shouted. Most laughed and sang, though a few grumbled about the long road. At night, the cloud became a pillar of fire, giving light and warmth. Aaron saw the angel of the Lord leading them. Moses followed without fear, even when the path seemed strange. At last, they reached the sea. Behind them rose high cliffs, before them stretched endless water. There was no way forward. They were trapped. A murmur swept through the people. First anxious whispers, then cries of fear. Mothers clutched their children. Men shouted at one another. Panic spread like fire in dry grass. Aaron whispered, "What do we do now?" "We wait for the Lord," Moses replied. "But there is no way forward," Aaron said. Moses answered, "The Lord told us to stop here. Pharaoh will come, and the Lord will show his power." How do we tell them this? Aaron thought. Surely they haven't come this far to be slaughtered by the sea. Then the sound came. Distant at first, then thundering. Hooves, wheels, horns. The Egyptian army poured into the canyon, chariots glinting in the sun, their battle cries echoing off the rocks. The ground shook beneath the people's feet. Terror gripped them. Faces turned pale. "Moses!" they screamed. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Their voices rose in a desperate chorus, anger mixing with despair. Some cursed, some wept, and others looked for a way back. The more the people saw the Egyptian army closing in, fear gripped them. Aaron tried to reason with them. "Have you forgotten what the Lord has done? He crushed Egypt with his power." But his words were drowned by the storm of fear. The weight of their disbelief pressed on Moses. Every eye turned on him, not with faith, but with accusation. The people he led could not see beyond the sea. Still, he stood firm. His voice cut through the chaos, clear, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you." The shouting stilled, but the terror did not leave their eyes. Suddenly the pillar of cloud shifted. The angel of the Lord moved from before them to behind them, planting himself between Israel and Egypt. Darkness swallowed the Egyptians, while fire lit the night for the Israelites. A holy barrier held the enemy back. They were struck with darkness and couldn't move forward. Then God gave his command. The Lord commanded Moses to move the people forward. He was to lift his staff over the sea, and the waters would divide, opening a path of dry ground for Israel to cross. Behind them, the Egyptians would pursue. But through this, the Lord's glory would be revealed to all of Egypt. A strong wind rose. First a whisper, then a howl. It tore across the sea, violent and unrelenting, driving the waters back until the seabed lay exposed. The ground trembled, the waves groaned. Slowly, impossibly, the sea split apart. Walls of water towered on both sides, glistening in the firelight. A path of dry ground stretched into the depths before the people. The people gasped. Some fell to their knees. Children hid their faces. Awe and terror mingled in every heart. Would the waters collapse? Was this safe? Was this real? Moses' voice rang out again, shepherding the flock of God. "Move forward." Aaron echoed him, trembling. "Move forward!" The Israelites quickly walked forward, crossing safely through the sea. Parents carried their children. Animals pulled back but were forced forward. Some reached out to touch the walls of water, staring in disbelief at the droplets hanging frozen in the air. It was real. The Red Sea truly parted before their sight. Others hurried, afraid the waters might close at any moment. Behind them, the thunder of Egyptian chariots pressed close. All night they walked, a weary, desperate stream of people moving between walls of the impossible. At last, Israel reached the far shore. The pillar of fire lifted, and the barrier was gone. The Egyptians surged forward. Pharaoh's army charged into the sea path, horses screaming, wheels biting into the exposed seabed. Their torches cast wild shadows on the towering walls of water. The sound of iron and hooves filled the night. Chaos struck the Egyptians. Their chariots swerved and jammed. Wheels twisted. Confusion spread through the ranks. Terror filled their voices as they realized the Lord himself was fighting for Israel. Panicked, the army knew they had lost. Charging forward was not the wisest. "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." But it was too late. The Lord told Moses to stretch out his hand again. Moses obeyed. He stretched out his hand towards the sea, and the waters came crashing down. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. When silence fell and the waves closed over Pharaoh's army, the people stood breathless. The memory of their cries still lingered, how they had accused Moses and doubted him. They remembered the terror in their own voices, the disbelief that had crushed him under its weight. Now, standing safe on the far shore, shame and awe mingled in their hearts. They saw how little their fear had mattered, and how mighty their God truly was. The sea lay calm again, as though nothing had happened. But along the shore, broken bodies washed up with the tide. Egypt's pride now powerless, its strength now shattered. The Israelites stood in awe. They had crossed on dry ground, walls of water guarding them on either side, while their enemies lay drowned behind them. That day, the Lord rescued Israel from Egypt's power. The people saw his mighty hand, and awe filled their hearts. For the first time, they looked at Moses with new eyes, not as a man who had failed them, but as the servant of the Lord who had carried their unbelief and still led them forward. Fear gave way to reverence. Hearts swelled with faith. Moses felt the shift in their hearts. He looked at them, his eyes scanning their numbers. They were like sheep scattered without a shepherd. He knew their hearts. He knew their unbelief. And he wondered if he could keep carrying it. No, not now. He would think about that later. Right now, they had to move forward. Overwhelmed, he lifted his voice, not in rebuke, but in song. A song of victory, a song of the God who saves. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Aaron embraced his sons. Egypt trusted its armies, he said softly. but we will trust in the Lord our God." Miriam raised a tambourine, her steps breaking into dance. The women joined her, singing, "The Lord has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." Soon the whole camp was singing, their voices rising into the night, echoing across the desert. Songs of deliverance, songs of freedom, songs of a God who saves. Just as Vashti's heart was hardened, so Esther could rise as queen and God's people be saved. Pharaoh's heart was not hardened by his own strength. God hardened it, so his mighty hand would be revealed. Nothing happens outside his plan. Pharaoh thought he ruled Egypt. Vashti thought she held the throne. But God was the one writing the story all along. In every rise and fall, his people must be preserved. A song of deliverance. When the people of Israel saw the power of God at the sea, their voices rose in a song of triumph. They sang of the Lord's strength and victory, the God who hurled horse and rider into the waters. He was their strength, their song, their deliverer, a warrior whose name was Yahweh. They remembered how Pharaoh's chariots and soldiers were cast into the depths. The finest of Egypt's armies were swallowed by the sea, sinking like stones beneath the waves. The Lord's right hand had shattered the enemy, his blazing fury consuming them like fire. With the breath of his command, the waters had risen up, standing like walls on either side. The enemy had boasted of pursuit, of conquest and destruction, but a single breath from God swept them away. They sank like lead into the mighty waters. The people sang of his holiness, his splendor, his wonders. No God could compare to him. By his love, he had redeemed his people, and by his strength, he was guiding them to his holy dwelling. Nations would hear of this and tremble. The peoples of Philistia, Edom, Moab, and Canaan would melt with fear as the Lord's redeemed passed safely through. For he had chosen a mountain, a sanctuary for his dwelling, and his reign would endure forever. As the song rose, Miriam the prophet, sister of Aaron, took up a tambourine. The women followed her with tambourines and dancing, echoing the song, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider, he has been thrown into the sea." The Israelites left Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin. It was 1 month after leaving Egypt. Hunger quickly set in, and the people complained against Moses and Aaron. They remembered the food of Egypt, meat and bread, and longed for what they had left behind. The Lord heard their complaints and promised to provide. Food would fall from heaven each day. Each family could gather just enough for their needs. On the 6th day, they would gather twice as much to prepare for the Sabbath. That evening, flocks of quail filled the camp. By morning, the ground was covered with a fine, flaky substance, as delicate as frost. The Israelites marveled at this gift. Moses explained that it was food from the Lord. Each household was to collect only what they needed. Some gathered much, some little, but everyone had exactly enough. The Israelites named the food manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers sweetened with honey. Moses collected some in a jar and placed it in a sacred place before the Lord, preserving it for future generations to see how God had provided in the wilderness. When manna was kept overnight, it spoiled and grew worms. It also smelled bad. Moses was angry because the people hadn't followed God's instructions. But each morning, fresh manna appeared for everyone. Any flakes left on the ground melted as the sun rose. Day by day, the people gathered only what they needed, learning to trust God to provide. On the 6th day, the people gathered twice as much manna. The leaders asked Moses why, and he explained it was to prepare for the Sabbath. The seventh day was a holy day of rest. Anyone who tried to gather food on that day found nothing. Over time, the people learned to trust God's daily provision. The Israelites each morning, and it continued until they reached the borders of Canaan, the land God had promised. Each person gathered about an omer, roughly 2 quarts. God's provision was always perfect. They were given exactly what they needed each day. The Israelites moved forward, step by step, as the Lord had commanded, leaving behind the wilderness of sin. From place to place they journeyed, a vast caravan of hope and fear intertwined. Eventually, they came to a place called Rephidim. But when they arrived, a harsh truth greeted them. There was no water, not a drop for the people, not a drop for their children, not a drop for their livestock. Thirst clawed at them. Voices rose in anger and desperation. "Give us water to drink," they cried, turning their frustration toward Moses. "Quiet," Moses pleaded, his own patience fraying. "Why are you complaining against me? Why are you testing the Lord?" But their parched throats could not be silenced. Fear and desperation sharpened their words. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt?" they demanded. "Is this your plan, to kill us, our children, and our animals with thirst?" Moses felt the weight of their despair. He raised his hands to the heavens. "Lord," he cried, "what am I to do with these people? They are ready to stone me." And the Lord answered him, calm yet commanding, "Walk before the people. Take the staff with which you struck the Nile, and gather some of the elders of Israel. I will stand before you on the rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will gush out. The people will drink, and their thirst will be quenched." Moses obeyed. With the elders watching, he struck the rock as the Lord had instructed, and like a miracle breaking through the dry earth, water poured forth, flowing freely for all to drink. Moses called that place Massah, which means test, and Meribah, meaning arguing. For there the Israelites tested the Lord, questioning, "Is the Lord here with us or not?" And in that moment, the people drank not just water, but a living reminder that even in the driest, most desperate places, God's presence flows abundantly. The Israelites camped at Rephidim. Suddenly, a shadow fell over them. The Amalekites had arrived, fierce and ready to strike. Panic swept through the camp, but Moses stood firm. "Choose some men," he said to Joshua. "Go fight Amalek. I will stand on the hill tomorrow, staff of God in hand." Joshua, strong and fearless, obeyed immediately. He had a heart for God and a courage that inspired others. Leading the chosen men into battle, he struck hard and never wavered. Swords clashed. Cries of warriors echoed across the dry land. Meanwhile, Moses climbed a nearby hill with Aaron and Hur. He lifted the staff of God high. It was a symbol of divine power. As long as Moses held the staff up, the Israelites gained ground. The Amalekites fell back. But when his arms grew tired, the enemy surged forward. Moses' strength faltered. Aaron and Hur saw him struggling. They found a stone for him to sit on. Then they held his hands steady, refusing to let them drop. Together, they persevered until the sun set. With Moses' hands upheld, Joshua led Israel to victory, and the Amalekite army was defeated. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Write this down. Read it to Joshua. I will erase Amalek from under heaven." In gratitude, Moses built an altar. He named it Yahweh Nissi, "The Lord is my banner." He declared, "They have fought against the Lord." so the Lord will fight Amalek forever." The hill became a symbol. Courage, unity, and God's power stood there. A banner of hope and victory rose above the battlefield. Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel. He heard how the Lord had rescued them from Egypt. Moses had sent his wife Zipporah and his 2 sons back to Jethro. The first was Gershom, named because Moses had been a foreigner in a strange land. The second was Eleazar, named because God had been his helper and saved him from Pharaoh's sword. Now Jethro came into the wilderness to meet Moses. He brought Zipporah and the 2 sons with him. They arrived at the mountain of God. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed low and kissed him. They greeted one another and entered the tent. Moses told Jethro all the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to Egypt. He told him of the hardships along the way and how the Lord delivered Israel from every trouble. Jethro rejoiced at all the Lord had done. He praised God for rescuing Israel from the power of Egypt. He declared that the Lord is greater than all other gods. Then Jethro offered a burnt sacrifice and other offerings to God. Aaron and the elders of Israel came, and together they shared a meal in the presence of the Lord. The next day, Moses sat to hear the disputes of the people. From morning until evening, they stood before him, waiting for judgment. The strain was heavy. With countless voices demanding answers, Moses bore the weight of their expectations, their conflicts, and their cries for justice. Each case pressed on his shoulders as though the entire nation leaned on him alone. Jethro, his father-in-law, saw the burden Moses carried. He realized that Moses was taking on the weight of every case, great and small, alone. Moses explained that the people came to him for God's rulings. He judged between them, taught them God's decrees, and gave them his instructions. But Jethro knew the task was too heavy. He warned that Moses would wear himself out, and the people with him. He advised Moses to continue representing the people before God, bringing their disputes to him and teaching them his ways. But he also urged Moses to appoint capable and trustworthy men who feared God and rejected corruption. They were to serve as leaders over thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s. These leaders would handle the smaller matters, while the greater cases would still come to Moses. In this way, the burden would be shared, and the people would find peace. Moses listened to the counsel of his father-in-law. He chose capable men from among Israel and placed them as leaders of the people. They judged the daily disputes, bringing only the difficult matters to Moses. Moses and Aaron's load became lighter, but leading the people was still very heavy. It was a calling that needed strength, humility, and trusting God every step of the way. After this, Jethro departed and returned to his own land. 2 months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites entered the wilderness of Sinai. From Rephidim they moved on, setting up camp at the base of Mount Sinai. Moses climbed the mountain to meet with God. The Lord gave him a message for Israel. They had seen his power in Egypt, how he carried them on eagle's wings and brought them to himself. If they obeyed his covenant, they would be his treasured possession, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Moses went down and told the elders. The people answered with one voice, pledging to obey the Lord. Moses carried their response back up the mountain. Then the Lord said he would appear in a thick cloud, so the people themselves could hear his voice and believe in Moses forever. He commanded that the people be consecrated, that they wash their clothes and prepare for the 3rd day, when he would descend upon the mountain before their eyes. Boundaries were to be set around the mountain. No one was to touch it. Any who crossed the line whether man or beast, must be put to death. Only when the ram's horn sounded long would the people be permitted to approach. Moses returned and consecrated the people. They washed their garments and made themselves ready. On the morning of the third day, thunder shook the heavens. Lightning split the sky. A dense cloud covered the mountain. A trumpet blast sounded long and loud, and the people trembled. Moses led them out to meet God. At the foot of the mountain, they stood. Sinai was wrapped in smoke, for the Lord had descended in fire. The smoke rose like a furnace. The mountain shook violently. The blast of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Moses spoke, and God answered in thunder. The Lord came down on the mountain and summoned Moses to the summit. Moses climbed upward, but the Lord sent him down again, warning that the people must not break through the boundary to gaze upon him, or they would perish. Even the priests were to consecrate themselves or face destruction. God commanded Moses to bring Aaron up, but no others. The people and the priests were to stay back. Moses descended once more and delivered the Lord's words to the people. He declared that he was the Lord, their God, who had brought them out of Egypt, out of slavery. They were to have no other gods besides him. They were not to make idols or images of anything in heaven, on earth, or in the waters below. They were not to bow to them or worship them, for the Lord is a jealous God. He would visit the sins of those who rejected him down to the third and fourth generation, but he would show steadfast love to 1,000 generations of those who loved him and kept his commands. They were not to misuse the name of the Lord their God. The Lord would not leave unpunished anyone who misused his name. They were to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. For 6 days they could labor and do all their work, but the seventh was a day of rest, set apart for the Lord. On it no one was to work, not their children, their servants, their livestock, nor the foreigner in their gates. In 6 days the Lord had made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh he rested, and so he blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. They were to honor their father and mother, that they might live long in the land God was giving them. They were not to murder. They were not to commit adultery. They were not to steal. They were not to give false testimony. They were not to covet neither a neighbor's house, nor spouse, nor servant, nor livestock, nor anything that belonged to another. When the people saw the thunder and lightning, when they heard the trumpet blast and saw the smoke rising from the mountain, they trembled. They stood at a distance, overwhelmed with fear. They begged that Moses would speak to them instead of God, lest they die. Moses told them not to be afraid, for God had come to test them, so that the fear of him would keep them from sin. Still, the people stayed at a distance, while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. The Lord spoke again to Moses. He reminded Israel that they had seen for themselves how he spoke from heaven. They were never to make idols of silver or gold to rival him. Instead, they were to build an altar of earth, and there present their burnt offerings and peace offerings, their sheep, their goats, and their cattle. Wherever he caused his name to be remembered, he would come to them and bless them. If they were built with stone, the stones would remain natural and uncut. No tool was to shape them, for that would make the altar unfit for holy use. And they were not to approach the altar by steps, so that no nakedness would be exposed. Anyone who assaults and kills another person must be put to death. But if it is an accident permitted by God, there will be a place of refuge for the one who kills to flee for safety. Yet if the killing is deliberate, even if the slayer clings to the altar, that person must be put to death. Anyone who strikes father or mother must be put to death. Anyone who kidnaps another, whether found in possession of the victim or after selling them, must be put to death. Anyone who curses father or mother must be put to death. If two men quarrel, and one strikes the other with a stone or a fist, and the victim does not die but is confined to bed, the assailant must pay compensation. If the injured man recovers enough to walk with a staff, the assailant is not punished, but must cover lost wages and care until full recovery. If a man beats his slave, male or female, and the slave dies, the owner must be punished. But if the slave recovers within a day or two, there is no punishment, for the slave is his property. If men are fighting, and in the struggle a pregnant woman is struck, causing a premature birth, but no further harm occurs, the offender must pay whatever the husband demands and the judges allow. But if there is further harm, the punishment must fit the injury. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. If a slave's eye is struck and blinded, the slave must be set free as compensation. If a tooth is knocked out, the slave must also be set free. If an ox gores a man or woman to death, the ox must be stoned, and its meat may not be eaten, though the owner is not guilty. But if the ox was known to gore, and the owner failed to restrain it, and it kills someone, the ox must be stoned and the owner put to death. Yet the family of the victim may accept payment. If so, the owner's life is spared through ransom. This same law applies whether the victim is an adult or a child. If the ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner must pay 30 silver coins to the master of the slave, and the ox must be stoned. If someone digs a pit and leaves it uncovered, and an ox or donkey falls in, the one responsible must pay the animal's owner, but may keep the dead animal. If one man's ox kills another's, the two must sell the living ox and share its price, and divide the carcass. But if the ox was known to gore, and the owner failed to restrain it, he must provide full compensation. A living ox for the dead one, yet the carcass belongs to him. If someone steals an ox or a sheep, and then kills it or sells it, the thief must repay 5 oxen for each ox, and 4 sheep for each sheep. If a thief is caught breaking into a house at night and is killed in the act, the defender is not guilty of murder. But if it happens in daylight and the thief is struck down, it is murder. A thief who is caught must repay what was stolen in full. If he cannot pay, he is to be sold as a slave to make restitution. If the stolen ox, donkey, or sheep is found alive in his possession, he must repay double. If an animal is allowed to graze in another man's field or vineyard, the owner must make restitution with the best of his own crops. If a fire spreads and destroys sheaves, uncut grain, or an entire field, the one who started the fire must pay for the loss. If money or goods are entrusted to a neighbor for safekeeping and are stolen from his house, the thief, if caught, must pay double. If the thief is not found, the neighbor must stand before God to swear that he has not taken the property. If there is a dispute over ownership of an ox, a donkey, a sheep, a garment, or any lost property, both parties must appear before God. The one whom God declares guilty must repay double to the other. If an animal is left with a neighbor for safekeeping, and it dies, is injured, or is taken, with no witnesses, the neighbor must swear before the Lord that he has not stolen it. If the oath is accepted, no restitution is required. But if it was stolen, the neighbor must repay the owner. If it was torn by a wild beast, the remains must be shown as proof, and no payment is required. If someone borrows an animal and it is injured or dies while the owner is absent, full compensation must be made. But if the owner is present, no payment is required. If the animal was rented, no compensation is owed, since the loss is covered by the rental fee. If a man seduces a young woman who is not engaged, he must pay the bride price and marry her. But if her father refuses to give her in marriage, the man must still pay the bride price. The Lord commanded, "Do not allow a sorceress to live. Anyone who lies with an animal must be put to death. Anyone who sacrifices to another god must be destroyed. Do not mistreat or oppress foreigners, for you were once foreigners in Egypt. Do not take advantage of widows or orphans. If they cry out to me, I will hear. My anger will burn, and I will strike with the sword. Then your wives will be widows, and your children fatherless. If you lend to the poor, do not charge interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it before sunset, for it may be his only covering. If he cries out to me, I will hear him, for I am merciful. Do not dishonor God, and do not curse your rulers. Do not withhold your offerings. Present to me your firstborn sons and the firstborn of your cattle, sheep, and goats. Keep the newborn with its mother for 7 days. On the 8th day, give it to me. You must be my holy people. Do not eat the flesh of animals torn by wild beasts. Throw it to the dogs. Do not spread false rumors. Do not join with the wicked by lying on the witness stand. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When called to testify, do not let the crowd sway you to twist justice, and do not show favoritism in court, even to the poor. If you find your enemy's ox or donkey wandering, return it to him. If you see his donkey collapsed under a load, do not walk away. Stop and help. Do not deny justice to the poor. Do not accuse anyone falsely. Do not condemn the innocent or the blameless, for I will never declare the guilty innocent. Take no bribes, for bribes blind the clear-eyed and twist the words of the righteous. Do not oppress foreigners. Remember you were foreigners in Egypt. Plant and harvest your fields for 6 years. But in the 7th year, let the land rest. Allow the poor to gather what grows, and let the wild animals eat what remains. Do the same with your vineyards and olive groves. Work for 6 days, but on the 7th, rest. Give your ox and your donkey a break. Give your servants and the foreigners among you time to be refreshed. Each year, God spoke to his people, saying, Celebrate 3 festivals in my honor. Mark them carefully, for they are sacred times of remembrance and worship. The first festival was the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days, the people were to eat bread without yeast, just as God had commanded. This was no ordinary festival. It was a living reminder of their escape from Egypt, their journey from slavery to freedom. Every spring, in the month of Abib, they were to gather and honor God, bringing offerings before him. None could come empty-handed. All were to bring something as a sign of devotion and gratitude. The second was the festival of harvest. As the fields ripened and the first fruits of their labor appeared, the Israelites were to bring these first crops to God. It was a festival of thanksgiving, an acknowledgement that every blessing, every seed that sprouted, came from his hand. And finally, at the end of the harvest season, they were to celebrate the festival of the final harvest. When the fields were emptied and the last fruits gathered, all Israel was called to appear before the Lord. It was a season of completion, a time to reflect on God's provision, throughout the year. God gave clear instructions for the offerings. The blood of any sacrifice must never be combined with bread made with yeast. The fat of festival offerings could not remain until morning, but was to be offered faithfully. And as they brought their harvest, they were to present only the very best to the Lord, a token of honor and respect. One command stood out as a reminder of purity and reverence. Never cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Through these festivals, God was not just asking for ritual. He was inviting his people into a relationship of remembrance, obedience, and gratitude. Each festival told a story of deliverance, of blessing, and of faithful provision. And in every act of offering, they declared with their hearts and hands, "The Lord is my God, and I honor him above all." God promised to send an angel to go ahead of the Israelites. This angel's job was to protect them and guide them safely to the land God had prepared for them. The people needed to listen carefully and follow the angel's instructions, because ignoring them would have serious consequences. God also promised that if they obeyed, he would fight for them. Their enemies would be defeated, and the land would be ready for them to live in. The angel would lead them into the lands of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These nations would be removed to make room for God's people. The Israelites were warned not to worship the gods of these nations or copy their ways. They were to remove all idols and sacred objects so that nothing would distract them from following God. Obedience to God brought blessings. The people would have enough food and water. They would be protected from sickness, and their families would grow strong and healthy. Life in the land would be full and good. God would also send fear ahead of the Israelites to make their enemies turn and run. He would drive them out gradually so the land would stay fertile and safe instead of being overrun by wild animals. The boundaries of the land were set, from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, and from the eastern wilderness to the Euphrates. The people living there would be removed to make room for God's people. God made it clear that no deals or treaties should be made with these nations. If they stayed, they could lead the Israelites into sin. Following other gods would trap them in the wrong path. God had a plan. He would guide, protect, and bless his people. But it all depended on their willingness to listen and obey. By following him, they could live safely and enjoy the good land he had promised. The Lord called Moses to come up the mountain. He told him to take Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of Israel's elders. Everyone else was to worship from a distance. Only Moses could come near to God. No one else was allowed to climb the mountain. Moses went down to the people and shared all the instructions God had given him. The people responded together, saying, "We will do everything the Lord has commanded." Moses carefully wrote down all of God's instructions. Early the next morning, he built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 pillars, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent young men to present burnt offerings and to sacrifice bulls as peace offerings to the Lord. Half the blood from these animals was poured into basins, and the other half was splattered against the altar. Moses read the book of the covenant aloud to the people. Once again, they promised, "We will obey everything the Lord has commanded." Then Moses sprinkled the blood over the people, saying, "This blood confirms the covenant the Lord has made with you." After that, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders climbed the mountain. There they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was a surface, like brilliant blue lapis lazuli, as clear as the sky. Even though they saw God, he did not destroy them. In fact, They shared a covenant meal, eating and drinking in his presence. The Lord told Moses to come even closer. He would give him the stone tablets with the instructions and commands to teach the people. Moses and his assistant Joshua set out, while the elders stayed at the foot of the mountain. Moses told them to wait there and consult with Aaron and Hur if any disputes arose. As Moses climbed higher, a cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, covering it for 6 days. On the 7th day, God called to Moses from inside the cloud. The Israelites saw the glory of the Lord at the top of the mountain, blazing like a consuming fire. Moses disappeared into the cloud and remained on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving God's instructions. On the mountain, the Lord gave Moses instructions for the people. The Israelites were to bring sacred offerings, not out of duty, but from hearts that were willing. Their gifts would come in many forms: gold, silver, and bronze, threads of blue, purple, and scarlet, fine linen and cloth woven from goat hair, tanned ram skins and soft goatskin leather, acacia wood, olive oil for the lamps, spices for anointing oil and fragrant incense, and precious stones, onyx and other gems to be set into the priestly garments. With these offerings, the people would build a holy sanctuary, a dwelling place where God would live among them. And the tabernacle with all its furnishings was to be crafted with precision, following the exact pattern that the Lord revealed to Moses. The ark was to be built from acacia wood, 45 inches long, 27 wide, and 27 high. It was covered inside and out with pure gold, framed with a crown of gold. 4 rings of gold were cast and fastened to its feet, 2 on each side. Poles of acacia wood, overlaid with gold, were placed through the rings so the ark could be carried. These poles were never to be removed. Inside the ark rested the stone tablets, the covenant written by God's own hand. A cover of pure gold was made, the place of atonement, the same length and width as the ark. At each end, a cherub was formed from hammered gold, one piece with the cover. Their wings stretched upward, overshadowing the mercy seat. They faced one another, gazing down upon the holy covering. The ark held the covenant, sealed beneath the mercy seat, and from above the cherubim, God's presence would dwell, giving his commands for Israel. The table was made of acacia wood, 36 inches long, 18 inches wide, and 27 inches high. It was overlaid with pure gold and surrounded with a gold molding around its edge. A border 3 inches wide was crafted around it, with a gold molding running along the border. 4 rings of gold were attached at the 4 corners, close to the legs. These rings held the poles used to carry the table. The poles themselves were made of acacia wood and covered with gold. Special containers were fashioned from pure gold for the pouring out of offerings. Upon this table, the bread of the presence was to remain continually before the Lord. The lampstand was made of pure hammered gold, formed as a single piece with its base, center stem, cups, buds, and petals. From the stem extended 6 branches, 3 on each side. Each branch was adorned with 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, complete with buds and petals. The center stem itself held 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, with buds and petals. Beneath each pair of branches, an almond bud was crafted, joining them to the stem. All of it was made as one piece, hammered from pure gold. 7 lamps were placed upon the stand, set to cast their light forward. Even the trays and snuffers were of pure gold. 75 pounds of gold were required for the lampstand and all its accessories. And all was fashioned according to the pattern shown on the mountain. The tabernacle was made with 10 curtains of finely woven linen. decorated with blue, purple, and scarlet thread, embroidered with cherubim. Each curtain measured 42 feet long and 6 feet wide. 5 were joined together to form one great piece, and the other 5 formed another. Along the edges were loops of blue yarn, 50 on one set, 50 on the other, joined by 50 gold clasps, so that the tabernacle became one continuous covering. Over this was a second layer, 11 curtains of goat hair cloth, each 45 feet long and 6 feet wide. 5 were joined as one and 6 as another. The extra length allowed the fabric to hang over the front and back of the tent, with 18 inches draping down the sides. These were fastened together with 50 bronze clasps, forming a single tent covering. Above them lay a protective layer of tanned ram skins, topped with fine goatskin leather. The framework was built from acacia wood. Each frame stood 15 feet high and 27 inches wide, with 2 pegs at its base. 20 frames supported the south side, 20 more the north, each set into silver bases, 2 bases under each frame. At the rear, 6 frames formed the west side, strengthened by 2 corner frames, joined at top and bottom by a single ring. In all, 8 frames at the rear stood in 16 silver bases. Crossbars of acacia wood held the structure together. The middle crossbar ran the full length of the tabernacle. Every frame was overlaid with gold, the crossbars as well, with gold rings to hold them. Inside, a special curtain of finely woven linen hung, richly embroidered with blue, purple, and scarlet thread, with cherubim skillfully stitched into its design. It was hung on 4 posts of acacia wood overlaid with gold, set into silver bases. Behind this curtain stood the Ark of the Covenant, and the curtain divided the holy place from the most holy place. Within the inner room rested the Ark, covered with the atonement lid. Outside the curtain, the table stood on the north side, with the lampstand across from it on the south. At the entrance, another curtain was woven of fine linen, embroidered with blue, purple, and scarlet thread. It hung from 5 acacia posts overlaid with gold, set into bronze bases. Thus the tabernacle was prepared, a dwelling place for the presence of the Lord. The altar was built from acacia wood, 7.5 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, and 4.5 feet high. At each corner rose a horn, formed as one piece, overlaid with bronze. It was all made of bronze. A bronze grating was set halfway down its side, with 4 rings to hold it. Poles of acacia wood, covered in bronze, were placed through the rings so the altar could be carried. Hollow and built from planks, it was made exactly as shown on the mountain. Around the tabernacle stretched the courtyard. Curtains of fine linen, 150 feet long, hung on the south side, supported by 20 posts in bronze bases with silver hooks and rings. The north side was the same. The west end measured 75 feet with 10 posts. The east end was also 75 feet, with 2 curtains at either side of the entrance, each 22.5 feet long with 3 posts. Between them hung the entrance curtain, 30 feet wide, woven from fine linen and embroidered in blue, purple, and scarlet, supported by 4 posts. All the posts of the courtyard stood in bronze bases, joined by silver hooks and rings. The enclosure measured 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 7.5 feet high. Every tool, every peg, every piece of the tabernacle and its courtyard was made of bronze. The tabernacle courtyard was enclosed with linen curtains. On the south side, they stretched 150 feet, held by 20 posts in bronze bases with silver hooks and rings. The north side was the same. The west end measured 75 feet with 10 posts. At the east stood the entrance, also 75 feet wide. On one side hung a curtain 22.5 feet long with 3 posts. and on the other side, a matching curtain with 3 posts. Between them hung the entrance curtain, 30 feet wide, finely woven and embroidered in blue, purple, and scarlet, supported by 4 posts. All the posts stood in bronze bases, joined with silver hooks and rings. The courtyard stretched 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 7.5 feet high. Every tool, every peg, every piece of the tabernacle and its courtyard was made of bronze. The people of Israel were commanded to bring pure oil of pressed olives, so the lamps would burn continually. The lampstand was placed in the tabernacle, in front of the inner curtain that shielded the Ark of the Covenant. Aaron and his sons were to keep the lamps burning in the Lord's presence throughout the night. This was established as a permanent law for Israel, to be observed from generation to generation. God gave Moses new instructions. Aaron, his brother, and Aaron's sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar were chosen. They were to be set apart, called to serve as priests before the Lord. Sacred garments were to be made for Aaron, glorious, beautiful, clothing that marked him as holy, set apart for God's service. God filled skilled craftsmen with wisdom for this task. Their hands would weave garments unlike any other. The list was detailed: a chest piece, an ephod, a robe, a patterned tunic, a turban, and a sash. Each piece carried meaning. Each piece was sacred. The materials were precious: fine linen, threads of blue, purple, and scarlet, and strands of gold. These garments would not only cover Aaron, they would declare his calling, a priest chosen to stand between God and his people. The ephod was to be crafted with care. Finely woven linen, threads of gold, blue, purple, and scarlet. Each stitch was skillfully embroidered. It was made of 2 pieces, front and back, joined at the shoulders. A sash of the same materials bound it together. On the shoulders rested something sacred: 2 onyx stones. Each stone was engraved with the names of Israel's tribes, 6 on one, 6 on the other, arranged by birth. Like a seal cut by a jeweler, the names were set into gold filigree. Aaron would wear them on his shoulders, a weight of remembrance, a sign that he carried the people before the Lord. Golden settings held them in place. Braided cords of pure gold fastened them securely. Every detail whispered of beauty. Every detail spoke of purpose. 4 rows of gemstones adorned it. Carnelian, peridot, and emerald formed the first row. Turquoise, lapis lazuli, and moonstone made the second. Jacinth, agate, and amethyst formed the third, and the 4th row held beryl, onyx, and jasper. Each stone was set in gold filigree, and each carried the name of one of Israel's tribes, 12 stones for the 12 sons of Jacob. The chest piece was fastened with braided gold cords and golden rings. Blue cords secured it above the ephod sash, so it would not shift or fall. In this way, Aaron carried the names of Israel over his heart whenever he entered the holy place, a constant reminder that he represented the people before God. Into this sacred chest piece were placed the Urim and Thummim, the holy objects used to discern the Lord's will. They rested close to Aaron's heart, a symbol of God's guidance for his people. The robe for the ephod was made from a single piece of blue cloth with an opening for Aaron's head reinforced by a woven collar so it would not tear. Along the hem, pomegranates of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn alternated with gold bells. As Aaron moved in and out of the holy place, the bells would tinkle, a sound that marked his service before the Lord. This robe was not just beautiful, it protected him, and as long as he wore it, he would not die. A medallion of pure gold was made and engraved like a seal with the words, "Holy to the Lord." It was attached to Aaron's turban with a blue cord and rested on his forehead, symbolizing the weight of the people's guilt and the need for God's acceptance whenever they brought sacred offerings. Aaron's patterned tunic and turban were woven from fine linen. A sash decorated with colorful embroidery completed his attire. For his sons, tunics, sashes, and head coverings were made, glorious and beautiful, fitting for priests who would serve alongside him. Aaron and his sons were then clothed, anointed, and ordained. Linen undergarments were provided to be worn next to their bodies from the hips to the thighs. These ensured that whenever they entered the tabernacle or approached the altar, they would not incur guilt or die. This law was permanent, set for Aaron and all his descendants, marking them as priests consecrated for God's service. This is how Aaron and his sons were consecrated to serve as priests. A young bull and 2 perfect rams were brought, bread made without yeast, thin cakes mixed with olive oil, and wafers spread with oil were placed in a single basket. Everything was presented at the entrance of the tabernacle. Aaron and his sons were washed with water. Aaron was dressed in his priestly garments, the tunic, the robe for the ephod itself, and the chest piece. The decorative sash was wrapped around him, and the turban was placed on his head. The sacred medallion was fastened to the turban, and anointing oil was poured over him. Then his sons were dressed in their tunics, sashes were tied around their waists, and their special head coverings were placed on them. The right to the priesthood became theirs forever. The young bull was presented. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head, and it was slaughtered at the tabernacle entrance. Its blood was applied to the altar, and its fat was burned. The rest, including the hide and meat, was taken outside the camp as a sin offering. Next, one of the rams was laid upon, slaughtered, and its blood splattered on all sides of the altar. It was cut into pieces, washed, and then burned on the altar as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The second ram was laid upon, slaughtered, and some of its blood applied to the right earlobes, thumbs, and big toes of Aaron and his sons. The remaining blood was sprinkled on them and their garments, setting them apart as holy. The fat of this ram, along with a portion of its meat and bread from the basket, were lifted up as a special offering to the Lord. These were then burned on the altar as a pleasing aroma. The breast of the ram was lifted up and kept as the priest's portion. From then on, whenever Israel offered a peace offering, a portion was set aside for Aaron and his descendants. Aaron's sacred garments were to be preserved for his descendants. The high priest who succeeded him would wear them for 7 days while serving in the tabernacle and the holy place. The meat of the ordination ram was boiled in a sacred place, and Aaron and his sons ate it along with the bread from the basket. Nothing left over could be eaten. It was holy. This ordination ceremony lasted 7 days. Each day, a young bull was sacrificed as a sin offering to purify the priests. The altar was purified and anointed each day until it became absolutely holy. Daily burnt offerings were commanded, 2 one-year-old lambs, 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening, each with flour, olive oil, and wine. These offerings were to be made from generation to generation at the tabernacle entrance. There, God would meet with the people of Israel. The tabernacle and the altar were consecrated. Aaron and his sons were set apart to serve as priests. God would live among his people. They would know that he is the Lord their God. He brought them out of Egypt so he could dwell among them. He is the Lord their God. God commanded another altar to be made, this one for burning incense. It was to be made of acacia wood, 18 inches square and 36 inches high. Horns were to be carved on each corner from the same piece of wood. The altar was to be overlaid with pure gold, and a gold molding ran around the whole altar. 2 gold rings were attached on opposite sides, just below the molding, to hold the carrying poles. The poles, made of acacia wood, were also overlaid with gold. This altar was to be placed just outside the inner curtain, in front of the Ark of the Covenant and the cover of atonement. This was the place where God would meet with his people. Every morning, when Aaron maintained the lamps, he was to burn fragrant incense on the altar. Every evening, when he lit the lamps, he would burn incense again in God's presence. This was to be done from generation to generation. No unholy incense could ever be offered on this altar. No burnt offerings, grain offerings, or liquid offerings were allowed on it. Once a year, Aaron was to purify the altar by smearing its horns with blood from the sin offering. This was to be a regular, annual event, for this was the Lord's most holy altar. The Lord spoke to Moses again. He gave instructions for a census of the people of Israel. Each man counted was to pay a ransom to the Lord. This would keep a plague from striking the people during the counting. Each person over 20 years old was to give a small silver offering, half a shekel, according to the sanctuary shekel. The rich were not to give more, and the poor not less. This offering was sacred, given to the Lord to purify their lives and make them right with him. Moses was to collect the silver and use it for the care of the tabernacle. This payment would bring the people to God's attention and purify their lives before him. The Lord gave Moses more instructions. He told him to make a bronze wash basin with a stand of bronze, place it between the tabernacle and the altar, and fill it with water. Aaron and his sons were to wash their hands and feet there. They had to wash whenever they entered the tabernacle to stand before the Lord. They also washed when approaching the altar to offer their gifts. This was not optional. If they failed to wash, they would die. This law was permanent. Aaron and his descendants were to follow it for all generations. The Lord gave Moses specific instructions for a sacred oil. He was to collect choice spices of pure myrrh, fragrant cinnamon, calamus, and cassia. Then add a gallon of olive oil. Like a skilled artisan, Moses was to blend these into a holy anointing oil. This oil would be used to consecrate the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the table and all its utensils, the lampstand and its accessories, the incense altar, the altar of burnt offering, and the wash basin with its stand. Everything touched by this oil would become holy. Aaron and his sons were to be anointed as priests to serve the Lord. The Lord commanded that this anointing oil was reserved for him alone, from generation to generation. It must never be used on anyone else. No one was to make another blend like it. Anyone who disobeyed would be cut off from the community. The Lord gave Moses more instructions, this time for a holy incense. He was to gather fragrant spices, resin droplets, mollusk shell, and gualbanum. These were to be blended with pure frankincense, measured in equal amounts. Using the careful techniques of an incense maker, Moses was to mix the spices and sprinkle in salt, creating a pure and holy incense. Some of the mixture was to be ground into a fine powder and placed in front of the Ark of the Covenant, where the Lord would meet with them in the tabernacle. This incense was to be treated as most holy. It was reserved for the Lord alone and must never be made for personal use. Anyone who disobeyed and made it for themselves would be cut off from the community. The Lord spoke to Moses again. He had chosen a man named Bezalel, son of Uri, grandson of Hur, from the tribe of Judah. God filled him with his spirit, giving him wisdom, ability, and expertise in every kind of craft. Bezalel was a master craftsman, skilled in working with gold, silver, and bronze. He could engrave and mount gemstones, carve wood, and excel in every craft. To help him, God appointed Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, from the tribe of Dan. God also gave special skill to all the gifted craftsmen, so they could create everything he commanded. They would make the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, and its cover. They would craft all the furnishings, the table and its utensils, the pure gold lampstand with all its accessories, the incense altar, the altar of burnt offering, the wash basin with its stand. They would also make the beautifully stitched sacred garments for Aaron and garments for his sons to serve as priests. Finally, they would prepare the anointing oil and the fragrant incense for the holy place. Everything had to be made exactly as the Lord commanded. The Lord spoke to Moses again, giving him a clear message for the people of Israel. He said, "Tell the people to keep my Sabbath day. The Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between me and you from generation to generation. It is a reminder that I am the Lord, and I make you holy. You have 6 days for work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath, a day of complete rest, dedicated to me. Anyone who works on that day or desecrates it will be cut off from the community. This is a covenant obligation for all time, a permanent sign between me and the people of Israel. For 6 days I made heaven and earth, but on the 7th day I rested and was refreshed." When the Lord finished speaking, he gave Moses the 2 stone tablets. They were inscribed with the terms of the covenant written by the finger of God. While Moses was up on Mount Sinai, the people grew impatient. They wondered what had happened to him. So they gathered around Aaron. "Come on," they said, "make us some gods to lead us. We don't know what happened to this Moses who brought us out of Egypt." Aaron asked them for their gold. The people gave him their rings, and he melted them down. Out of the gold, he fashioned a calf. When the people saw it, they shouted, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Aaron built an altar in front of the calf and declared, "Tomorrow will be a festival to the Lord." The next morning, the people sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings. Then they feasted, drank, and indulged in wild celebration. The Lord told Moses, "Go down quickly. Your people have corrupted themselves. They have turned away from the way I commanded. They melted gold to make a calf, bowed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt.'" God's anger burned. "Leave me alone, Moses. I could destroy them and make you into a great nation." But Moses pleaded with the Lord, "O Lord, why should your anger blaze against your own people? Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and your promise to them. Turn from your fierce anger. Forgive your people." The Lord relented and changed his mind about destroying them. Moses went down the mountain, carrying the 2 stone tablets inscribed by God's own hand. When Joshua heard the shouting in the camp, he said, "It sounds like war." But Moses replied, "No, it's not war or wailing. I hear celebration." When Moses saw the calf and the dancing, he burned with anger. He threw the stone tablets to the ground, shattering them. He destroyed the calf, ground it to powder, threw it into water, and made the people drink it. Then he confronted Aaron. "What did these people do to you to make you commit such a terrible sin?" Aaron replied, "Don't be angry, my lord. You know these people. They asked me for gods. I told them to give me their gold. I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." Moses saw how the people had gone completely out of control, to the shame of their enemies. He stood at the camp entrance and called out, "All who are on the Lord's side, come to me." The Levites gathered around him. Moses said, "This is what the Lord commands. "Go through the camp and put to death everyone who has turned against him, even your brothers, friends, and neighbors." The Levites obeyed. About 3,000 people died that day. Moses said to the Levites, "Today you have set yourselves apart for the Lord's service." You obeyed him, even though it meant striking your own brothers. Today, you have earned a blessing. The day after the golden calf incident, Moses returned to the Lord, seeking forgiveness for the people. He pleaded for them, aware of the terrible sin they had committed by making gods of gold for themselves. The Lord declared that the names of those who sinned would be erased, yet he promised guidance, sending his angel to lead the Israelites to the land he had promised. The people would still be held accountable for their actions, and because of their idolatry, a great plague struck them for worshipping the golden calf that Aaron had made. The Lord commanded Moses to lead the people toward the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a land flowing with milk and honey. He promised to send an angel ahead to drive out the inhabitants, but warned that he would not go with them because the people were stubborn and rebellious, and he might destroy them along the way. When the Israelites heard this, they mourned and removed their jewelry and fine clothes, showing their humility and sorrow. Moses would set up the tent of meeting some distance from the camp, and anyone seeking the Lord would go there. As Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and hover at its entrance, while the Lord spoke with him. The people watched reverently from their own tents, standing and bowing when they saw the cloud. Inside the tent of meeting, the Lord spoke to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend, while Joshua, his assistant, remained inside after Moses returned to the camp. The Lord commanded Moses to lead the people toward the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a land flowing with milk and honey. He promised to send an angel ahead to drive out the inhabitants, but warned that he would not go with them because the people were stubborn and rebellious, and he might destroy them along the way. When the Israelites heard this, they mourned and removed their jewelry and fine clothes, showing their humility and sorrow. Moses would set up the tent of meeting some distance from the camp, and anyone seeking the Lord would go there. As Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and hover at its entrance while the Lord spoke with him. The people watched reverently from their own tents, standing and bowing when they saw the cloud. Inside the tent of meeting, the Lord spoke to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend, while Joshua, his assistant, remained inside after Moses returned to the camp. Moses was commanded to carve 2 new stone tablets to replace the ones he had broken, and to climb Mount Sinai alone. Early in the morning, he ascended the mountain, carrying the tablets. The Lord appeared in a cloud and revealed his nature: compassionate, merciful, slow to anger, and full of love. Moses bowed in worship, seeking guidance for his stubborn people. God renewed his covenant with Israel, promising miraculous power and instructing them to drive out the nations in the land without making treaties or adopting their ways. The Israelites were told to destroy pagan altars, worship no other gods, and observe special festivals: the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of harvest, and the festival of the final harvest. Firstborn animals and sons were to be dedicated to God, and offerings of the best of their crops were required. Moses stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving the 10 commandments written by God on the stone tablets. When he descended, his face shone with God's glory. The people were afraid to approach him, so Moses called the leaders to come closer and shared God's instructions. To protect the people from the radiance of his face, Moses wore a veil, removing it only when speaking with the Lord inside the tent of meeting. The tabernacle was finally finished. The people had done everything God had asked. They brought all the pieces to Moses: the tent, the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the wash basin, the courtyard, and the priest's clothes. Moses looked at everything. It was all done just as God had commanded. He blessed the people. On the first day of the new year, Moses began setting up the tabernacle. He placed the Ark of the Covenant inside and hung the inner curtain. The table and its utensils were arranged. The lampstand was set up and lit. The gold incense altar was placed before the ark. Outside, the altar of burnt offering was positioned. The wash basin was filled with water. The courtyard was set up with its entrance curtain. Everything was anointed and made holy. Aaron and his sons were washed and dressed in priestly garments. They were anointed to serve as priests. Moses followed every command exactly. The stone tablets went inside the ark. The ark was placed in the tabernacle. The inner curtain was hung. The table, bread, and lampstand were arranged. The incense altar burned fragrant offerings. The priests washed before serving at the altar. Finally, the courtyard curtains were hung. The entrance was set. The tabernacle was complete. It stood holy and ready for God's presence. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle. The glory of the Lord filled it completely. Moses could no longer enter, for the cloud rested there. And this was the same Moses who once ran away in fear. The same man who doubted if he could ever stand before Pharaoh. A man who worried about his stammering tongue, unsure if he was enough for the task. Yet here he was, chosen and strengthened by God. Whenever the cloud lifted, the Israelites would set out on their journey. If the cloud stayed, they remained where they were. By day, the cloud hovered over the tabernacle. By night, fire glowed within the cloud. The whole nation of Israel could see it. This continued throughout all their journeys. Thank you for spending time with us here on the channel. If the story of God leading His people out of Egypt encouraged you today, give this video a like and share it with someone who needs this reminder of God's power and faithfulness. May the Lord's presence go with you, just as His cloud and fire went with Israel. Amen.